different elements from Mexican culture and a few facts. ¿Estos dónde van a estar? Ahí van a estar las imágenes. Okay. Yeah. So I'll be reading and then riffing a bit. Here it comes, its gait bold and determined, or else hesitant and subdued, depending on its experience in the world thus far. Here it is, making its way towards us, dodging cars, hugging walls, sniffing out the situation, on the lookout for voices or gestures that may grant some insight into a temperament. The stray dog must know what the human intends before coming any closer, whether he or she intends kindness or cruelty. It isn't aware of a social contract between us, but I am, and I shall honor it as best I can, despite concerns about startling it away or frightening it into defensive mode. It takes a few steps forward, devours my offering, and vanishes back into the labyrinth of Mexico City. Yet in London, one rarely sees stray dogs. Not long ago, a Mexican friend who lives here too commented on how she misses seeing stray dogs in the background. The city feels somewhat empty without them, she said, like there's something missing from the panorama. I remember being struck by her words and dwelled on them for a long time afterwards. If anything, I was thankful for their absence. Not because I don't love dogs, I certainly do, but because ever since childhood, the sight of a stray has nearly always triggered despair. Where did it come from? Where was it going? Always hungry, always on the move. On family car trips, I couldn't avert my eyes quickly enough from the road. The sight of one run over would haunt me for days. Yet I now began to think about how, despite their precarious situation, so unresolved, they represent an indomitable spirit, and in this aspect too, they're emblematic of our friendship. Over the centuries, dogs have been an enduring feature of Mexican life and art. Long before the Spanish conquistadors arrived in the New World with their snarling wolfhounds and mastiffs, the breed most familiar to the Aztecs was the hairless black Cholo Squinkle, or Cholo for short. Which Xolotl is Aztec, god of the underworld, and Squinkle is the word for dog. So Nahuatl it means what? Strange dog. And in English they refer to as Mexican hairless dogs. And the breed dates back 3,000 or 4,000 years. Columbus mentions him in his journal. And in the 1500s, one Spanish conquistador described the dog in his journal. He said it was a medium-sized, rather heavily built, and long-bodied in proportion to its height. Ears long and erect, tail thick, drooping, or carried nearly straight behind. Hair nearly absent, except for a few coarse hairs and generally a sparse coating on the tail, particularly near the tip, sometimes a tuft on the crown. Centuries later, the Cholos can be described nearly the exact same way. Their bodies are just usually as pot-bellied as that, but they're sleeker, but they're still the same bat ears and almond eyes. And there's three different breeds. There's the standard, miniature, and choy choys. So the Aztecs would use them as bed warmers, and they'd also eat them. And then in death, they were considered to be a guide to the underworld, and the Cholos would carry the souls of the deceased owner in their mouths. Something strange happened to me when I was living in Berlin. My friend Tom was visiting, and we were in a square one Sunday, and suddenly this Cholo just appeared out of the blue. I'd never seen a Cholo in Berlin, and it just came up to me and looked up at me. And then Tom said, "Look, it's recognized the other Mexican, also all in black and sort of adrift in Berlin." And I just had such a strange encounter with the dog that I thought I had to put it in my novel. So I was going to read my first novel, just a small passage about the Cholo, because this is almost exactly what happened that Sunday in Berlin. The day after the storm was one of those Sundays. I put on a jacket and headed towards the Wasserturm, an old water tower surrounded by shops and restaurants. The air had cooled, the city had been stilled, everything was a few keys quieter. I passed Bar Gagarin on the corner and debated whether to go in. As I stood deciding whether to enter or resume my walk, a black hairless dog appeared out of nowhere. He was a small dog, with dry, taut skin like that of a rhinoceros, and a sparse black mohawk that ran from the top of his head down the nape of his neck. His tail was set low and tucked in, almost hidden from sight. Everyone noticed him at the same time, and I watched in amusement as the Germans lunching outside laid down their knives and forks and stared in disbelief, unable surely to classify this creature with the gait of a dog, lacking the other distinguishing feature, namely hair. But I recognized him instantly as Cholo, member of the ancient canine breed from Mexico that an Aztec myth would guide human souls through Mictlan, the ninth and lowest circle of the labyrinthian underworld, to their eternal resting place. Only 4,000 Cholos were said to exist. Here was one, standing on a street corner in Berlin on a cool Sunday in August. And then I dog gazes into my eyes. I wondered whether I should bring him home. What if his owner was at another cafe on the square? Yet he didn't seem to belong to anyone. I decided to circle the block and consider the options. I remembered once hearing that the skin of Cholos was especially susceptible to wind and sunshine, and that prolonged exposure to the elements could lead to all kinds of cutaneous eruptions. I looked after this dog in Berlin, and how did he endure the German winters? After centuries of warming souls in life and guiding them in death, was this all he got in return? I would take him home. And then, so Cholos were very popular, have been ever since Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera. Artists have, many artists have kept Cholos as pets. Frida Kahlo's favorite pet Cholo was called Dr. Xoloco, and he was always by her side. They also had a pet monkey and a guacamaya, a big, I guess, macaw, and deer. But these, I feel, with the Cholos, she felt very connected also to the culture and the myth of the country. But also they were always, if you look at it, La Siguiente también, they were always either on her lap or when she was painting nearby, and then a few made it into her paintings. That's Dr. Xoloco. There's a very tiny version. And then Diego Rivera also had yeah, so. The Spaniards who sailed over in the late 1510s and early 1520s used their hounds as a weapon of war and transformed their dog from ally into adversary, a feared animal that would often tear its victims to pieces. And they even put this armor on their dogs. And that looks like a cholo with the, I'm not sure, the snout looks like a cholo armor. Once the conquest was largely complete and the dog's job for the most part done, they were said to hungrily roam the streets in search of prey. Oh, but sorry, this is a very brutal depiction from the Coyoacán Codex, which is called the Manuscrito del Aperreamiento, the manuscript of the dogging, they translated it. It's from Cholula from around 1560. And it represents a very graphic image of a dog attacking the chains of indigenous priests. So the document depicts Hernán Cortés, Marina, and Andrés de Tapia, who was an Aztec ruler of Tenochtitlan, whom Cortés appointed, and 6 chained Indians, and another being attacked by a dog, and that identifies the place as Coyoacán. And the scene depicts an early moment in the conquest when Cortés had moved to Coyoacán and had assembled the Aztec rulers from all the conquered villages and was assigning them to different encomenderos, which was in exchange for labor and taxes, labor and tributes. The Spanish lord would preside over them, supposedly, and provide protection, education. But it was actually a very brutal slave system. So there, apparently, this leader from Cholula has refused to follow Cortés's orders, so they set the master on him. So once the conquest was over, they freed a lot of these dogs they brought over to attack Aztecs, and those are the earliest incarnations of strays in Mexico. And I'm going to read a poem that my father wrote about a dog, not in Mexico, but nearby in the Caribbean, who was deserted on an island, because sometimes they would just, in order to lighten their load, they'd abandon animals on islands. They deserted one dog. It's called Dog Deserted on an Island. An epigraph is, they say that a dog's life is hunger and waiting, but hers was loneliness under the deep blue sky. The admiral and his companions have gone off, and on the horizon only the moon is left over the North Sea. What just the next? Oh, you can leave it there. The admiral and his companions have gone off, and on the horizon only the moon is left over the immense sea. Not comprehending the betrayed friendship and incapable of separating from the master who turned his back on dog deserted on an island, we build bridges across the void, but neither the whining nor the bargaining alter the pale distance. At nightfall, the loneliness knows no beginning nor end, but the betrayal is far bigger than the night. Days pass and weeks pass, and you, mounted on a rock, go on waiting for the master who sailed away. At any sign of the phantom returning, you race down to the beach and stand stock still on the lookout. In the company of stones, birds, and wind, you sleep on the sand, your love unconditional. All the more famished and desolate as time passes, your love turns into ferocity, until one day you turn up, stiff and dead, dog deserted on an island. That always upset me when I was growing up, but it's based on. So since those times, the dog has returned to being a creature man can usually subjugate, but somewhere within its scrawny figure resides the phantom of that battle. When I turned in my new novel Sea Monsters last year, my editors commented with some surprise on the number of mentions of dogs in my book, 37. But they are a leitmotif of daily life, I explained, present in nearly every landscape and cityscape, a mobile part of the composition. In my book, I describe the local dogs of Mexico City, where my narrator lives, both those who have owners and those who inhabit the collapsed ruins left by the earthquake, September 1985. A menagerie of strays, spectral cats with fake meows, and mangy dogs who spend hours pawing at imaginary food in the crevices. I was also intent on depicting the beach dogs, one of the most memorable features of my trip to Oaxaca. And I'm just going to read very quickly about these dogs so this novel that I published in February, it's a fictionalized version of an episode from my adolescence when I ran away to Oaxaca, to the Pacific coast, and with the character, ended up on my own. But the only rapport I had for many days was with a pack of stray dogs on the beach. So I now imagine my parents plastering my image to lampposts, my face added to the missing dog posters in our neighborhood. And there are in Mexico City many missing dog posters. Se busca Aslan, se busca Bonifacio, se busca Chipotle. Each time I saw one, I would fantasize about finding the animal, for the animal's sake, for the owner's sake, for the reward. But no image was permanent. These posters would start out vivid, inked with the owner's nervous expectation. But as the days went by and the hope and color would be drained from them, and one morning they'd be torn down by men in overalls who went around removing expired notices. Some of the animals I recognized, but others must have spent their entire lives indoors. I had a pretty good sense of most of the dogs in La Roma, many of whom were brought out to the park to run, others taken by the neighborhood dog walker. The dogs in Cipolite may have been safe from city woes, yet all day long they wandered up and down the beach as if scavenging for something not provided by the landscape. They took the beach's temperature, gauged its mood, sussed out every new arrival. A rag bag of breeds, none were one solid color, but rather patchwork of 2 or 3 tones. Some had faces like masks, pure black interrupted by a tan snout or a set of golden eyebrows. Others resembled wolves or oversized cats. One had a splash of German Shepherd, though he was much smaller in size and nowhere near as regal. These dogs were more like courtiers. but even among courtiers there must be a king. And the leader of the pack, as far as I could tell, was this unabashed shepherd Mongol, average in height but lofty in carriage, and the others followed around and turned to for cues. And I actually found his poem that my father had written called Dogs Running on the Beach, which, so I guess there've always been stray dogs on the beaches. And it's the dogs running on the beach don't see their shadow reflected, nor the sun go down on the horizon of the nothing. Perhaps tomorrow, when there are no dogs no more, they will know they were only shadows running towards nothing. The black dog leaping at tomorrow leaps the walls of the instant, but he's only falling on the lingering roads of another nothing. Evening, to the right, almost nothing. Blues of night already added in, and the sun that sets far away from the beach lights up without seeing a thing. The dogs of nothing run along the sands of unremembering, to return tomorrow to their run on the same never same beach as of nothing. That's the existence of stray dogs. Although in the city there's probably more variations to their days. So I wanted stray dogs to feature in my novel as a hymn to my country, to survival, and of course to the animals themselves. Yet looking back, on a more figurative level, I also wanted them to exist as a kind of antidote to plot expectation. But what cultivate stray dogs, yes, that's what cultivated reader sort of plot. Stray dogs proceed, seemingly, with only a vague sense of purpose. Their presence creates a mood, feeds into an atmosphere, without signposting major development. They may suggest movement and appetite and desire, but they don't impose action on the scene. They just are. Real life tends to be composed of quiet moments that fill the years between a handful of defining ones. A writer can choose to represent those quieter moments instead. A writer can favor meandering narratives, stray dog narrations one could call them, driven by something more subtle and inscrutable than action. Movement within a novel takes place, after all, on many different levels. Dogs were an important symbol for me while I was writing this previous novel, but they also represent a real concern. Mexico currently has more stray dogs than any other country in Latin America, and the number is steadily rising. Recently, the Secretary of the Environment said there's at least 1,482,000 dogs and 494,000 cats kept as pets in Mexico City. Out of those, there are at least 148,000 strays and 49,000 stray cats in the city. But there could be as many as 4 times that much, according to the Agency for Animal Attention. And every year, after spending only 3 months at home, 55% of recently acquired cats and dogs are voluntarily turned over to shelters to be sacrificed, or else they're abandoned, often in parks. They're dropped off in public parks at night, especially the third section of Chapultepec Park, which, if you've been to Mexico City, you've seen it's full of it's got packs of hounds. And fortunately, none of these dogs are fed daily by individuals or organizations. But every year, there's at least 30,000 pets that are abandoned. So in recognition of their plight, a charity called Milagros Caninos, Canine Miracles, erected a monument to the stray dog at the site of an unfrequented road in the southline borough of Tlalpan in 2008. Most monuments in Mexico tend to be of heroic individuals empowered by battle, yet this subject is skinny and forlorn, with a low-hanging head and jutting ribs, its body hunched over in defeat. The only battle it has won is that of narrow survival. Every now and then, yeah, that's on the pedestal. Every now and then, a scribble of graffiti appears on its metal flanks, gradually washed off by the rain. On the base, there was at first a plaque that read, "My only crime is to be born and have lived on the streets, or to have been abandoned. I didn't ask for this, and despite the blows and indifference, the only thing I demand is whatever remains of your love. I don't want to suffer. Surviving in this world is a matter of horror. Help me, please." A stray dog that has been given a name has a far greater chance of survival, Hannah Arendt famously remarked. Unlike other strays, this imaginary dog was granted a name, Peluso, but even that failed to rescue him from Bolivian. Last year, the plaque was stolen, deemed more valuable as scrap metal, perhaps, and the statue is currently in a sort of sorry state. And it's also in a part of Tlalpan where often not many cars pass by, so it just feels doubly abandoned. I can't help but wonder whether the mere fact of the monument's existence, an existence minimized by its remote location and persistent neglect, casts ambivalence versus canine that has accompanied them over the centuries. During their peripatetic lives, stray dogs are subject to the capricious behavior of humans, on the receiving end of kindness, cruelty, and indifference. Every December, for instance, hundreds are left behind by pilgrims at the Basilica de Guadalupe. The pilgrims feed them along the way, acquiring a companion for their travels, but after paying their respects to the Virgin, compassion is shed and they jump off a bus and abandon them. A staggering 70% of dogs in Mexico have no real home. Solitary or what's the next? Solitary or in packs, they occupy the lowest rank along with stray cats of any urban or rural hierarchy. My sister and I would often feed the scrawny mongrels that wander the unpaved streets of Contepec, Michoacan, the village where my father grew up. Dogs he describes in The Child Poet as the color of the sun, of a yellow that seems sprouted from the fields. I'm just going to read a very short passage. There were wandering dogs in the village, scrawny, dirty, and hungry. They would attach themselves to the first person who walked by, and for a while they had an owner, until a door closed in their face, and they'd go back to being no one's dog. They'd forage among scraps, prowling around houses, or roaming the hot streets, their shadows nearly vaporizing. They barked their way through the night hours, when the sky is full of silences, distances, and stellar solitudes. And every noise reaches us with the din of urgency and abandonment. The voices from the street sound as if something terrible were happening. I couldn't imagine where so many dogs had come from, and why they didn't have an owner. Many of them would gather in front of the butcher's stalls at the market, monitoring purchases, watching the cutting up of carcasses, staring at the bloody cows hanging from hooks, licking the blood from the floor, and fighting over skins and bones. Sometimes the butchers would subject them to butcher humor, tying strings of empty cans to their tails and lighting firecrackers that go off in a blast. The howling dogs would take flight, the cans clattering against the cobblestones, pursued by the noise of their own making. They'd run past me terrified, and if they managed to get into the house, they'd seek refuge under a better table, trembling violently, as if they're about to explode. The dogs were the color of the sun, of a yellow that seemed sprouted from the fields. You could see them from the train, running over the plain alongside the cars until exhausted they'd fall behind. We too were sometimes guilty of deserting an animal at the door. My grandmother already had her menagerie of cats, dogs, and birds, and we weren't allowed to add to it. Shadowing our existence and pursuing paths of their own, stray dogs lead a parallel existence to ours, and in cities seem to gravitate towards other beings who also dwell in the liminal spaces of society. So everyone in my family loves dogs very much. So my sister was a filmmaker. Her first documentary, she's done a trilogy of documentaries about Mexico. Her first one was called Niños de la Calle, Children of the Street, and she was the first thing she noticed was the symbiotic relationship that the street children have with their dogs, who accompany them day and night, sharing in fortunes and misfortunes. So speeding cars, predatory humans. But almost every time someone would give the children food, they'd share it with dogs. And the dogs would also protect them when policemen or anyone predatory would come near them. So she followed around 4 children for a year. And then I thought I should just briefly mention Amores Perros, because most people here will know about this film that came out in 2000, which was González Iñárritu's debut, that has dogs as a there's 3 stories intertwined, and the first one is this young man named Octavio, Stan Garcia Bernal's character, who starts training his dog to be in dog fights and making a lot of money from it. And then, the first scene
you've seen the films, there's a car chase and then a huge collision, and then it brings all the three stories together. So his dog, this man who's Roshan, he's a hermit, but he's also a hitman, and lives with his 4 dogs who follow him. He pushes around his supermarket trolley, but he saves the guy, the dog fighting dog, the dog from the car, and then brings him home, and then a very disturbing scene, he massacres all of his dogs. Anyway, so it's all lit, and then there's another vignette about a model who was in the car crash and loses her leg, and her lap dog is trapped on the floorboards. That storyline I found less powerful. But anyway, again, it's using these canine motifs and as symbols of difficult existence in cities and a very nihilistic world. It has very rough camera work, so it appears quite immediate and aesthetically quite rough and edgy. Very bare aesthetics. But the next one is, so that's Tamayo. Tamayo, so I don't have images of Francisco Toledo, but 2 of the great artists from Oaxaca, both animals, and that's the dog barking at the moon. On Rulfo's rural dramas, the barking of dogs usually announces death. So he's one famous short story called No oyes ladrar los perros, you hear dogs barking, and it's a father carrying his dying son, and whose death has been foretold by the barking of dogs, which grows closer. And then, of course, Malcolm Lowry, who was a Mexican, but he wrote Under the Volcano, throughout the book, the dogs appear. There's a pariah dog, stray dogs who appear, who seem to be harbingers of death, and also, in some ways, reminding him of his own exclusion from society. So I'm going to read just 2 passages from Under the Volcano, where this dog appears. So as you know, it's a lot in the interior monologue. So maybe the other Stop, put that bottle down, Jeffrey Furman. What are you doing to yourself? Another voice said in his ear so loudly he turned around. On the path before him, a little snake he had thought a twig was rustling off into the bushes, and he watched it a moment through his dark glasses, fascinated. It was a real snake, all right. Not that he was much bothered by anything so simple as snakes, he reflected with a degree of pride, gazing straight into the eyes of the dog that stood there too. It was a pariah dog, and disturbingly familiar. Perro, he repeated, as it stood there. Had not this incident occurred, was it not now, as it were, occurring an hour or 2 ago, he thought in a flash. Strange. He dropped the bottle, which was a white corrugated glass. Tequila añejo de Jalisco, it said on the label, out of sight into the undergrowth, looking about him. All seemed normal again. Anyway, both snake and dog had gone, and the voices had ceased. And then another little passage. The cantina's emptiness, and a strange ticking like that of some beetle within that emptiness, began to get on his nerves. He looked at his watch, only 17 minutes past 2. This was where the tick was coming from. Again he imagined himself taking the drink. Again his will failed him. Once the swing door opened, someone glanced round quickly to satisfy himself, went out. Was that Hugh or Jacques? Whoever it was, he seemed to possess the features of both, alternately. Someone else entered, and though the next instant the consul felt that this was not the case, went right through into the back room, peering around furtively. The starving pariah dog, with the appearance of having lately been skinned, had squeezed itself in after the last man. It looked up at the consul with beady, gentle eyes. Then, thrusting down its poor, wrecked dinghy of a chest, from which raw, withered breasts drooped, began to bow and sway before him. Ah, the ingress of the animal kingdom. Earlier it had been the insects. Now these were closing in upon him again, these animals, these people without ideas. Dispensa usted por Dios, he whispered to the dog, and wanting to say something kind, added, stooping, a phrase read or heard in youth or childhood. For God sees how timid and beautiful you really are, and the thoughts of hope that go with you like little white birds. And the very last line of the book, is the consul's corpse being thrown into a ditch and the bride dog thrown in after him, so. And then and another foreigner, Francis Alice, who, the next, yeah, and then that. So another foreigner who spent many, has made next to his home. It was also very inspired and has been very inspired by dogs. The way he described, so in 2003, he made a video called El Gringo, in which a patchwork of mongrels on a dust road gather around the camera in an ascending chorus, their vigorous barks on an almost comedic expression of territoriality. Here there's little doubt as to who belongs and who is intruding, but the different angles from which the video is shot suggest there's more than one dimension to the conflict. Francis Alice described this work himself as, you can do the next, as is well known, gringo is the derogatory term Mexicans use to refer to North American citizens. Shot in a central province of Mexico, Alice's video portrays the confrontation between a group of dogs protecting their master's home and an intruder, the cameraman, invisible to the warped spectators. In this fiction of sorts, the camera takes an active role in the unfolding of the narrative. By examining the way in which its oppressive gaze can be a form of weaponry as much as a shield, it draws attention to how video cameras have become an epitome of power. Acting like a dog among dogs, Alice deliberately set the camera against the animals, knowing that dogs loathe direct eye contact. Throughout the film, the camera manages to keep the dogs at bay, sometimes providing a physical armor, sometimes actively entering the game of menace and recognition. And he breaks it down to the protagonist is the camera, the cause of conflict is the crossing of a road blocked by dogs at the entry of a village. Agents of conflict are the dogs, and the plot is the camera has to break its way through the pack of dogs in order to enter the village. So, but it's on his website, and it's quite an amusing video. And then la última. So even more than the long-suffering donkey, which in recent decades has all but vanished from the Mexican countryside, the stray dog endures yet rarely forms part of the action. Always present, always in limbo, its uncertain gait, identifiable from afar, it shares our public spaces, infusing them with a noble life force, its own existence endangered, yet its kind never in danger of extinction.
Questions?
Yes. How did you calculate 70%? You said that 70% of dogs in Mexico are stray.
That's what,
How do you arrive at that figure?
doing just research. Both my parents in Mexico and newspapers, because they archive most articles that come out about animal welfare.
But they don't have to register anywhere,
No.
No.
Often what happens is,
or a dog license.
no. But often one can, I guess they just, I don't know the method for distinguishing which ones are. But I know, for instance, there are dogs who don't have owners, but they live in a comunidad, there'll be an inner, how do you say it?
Pack of dogs.
Yeah, or an inner patio, and there'll be dogs that don't have an owner but are fed by local residents. But then there's others who are very clearly have no owner.
There all seems to be a small number of breeds. It's
Yeah.
not like, you don't see poodles.
No, yeah, most of them have some shepherd in them. A
Yeah.
lot of them seem to be like permutations of shepherd. And then
Or Jack Russells. No.
the smaller, yeah, you have like more terrier sorts. And then I've never seen a stray cholo, for instance. So I wasn't actually preface the talk by saying it's mostly about strays, but the cholos aren't so. But yeah, it's a growing problem, and in other Latin American countries too, but Mexico has always been. And it's astonishing to see how there's tremendous acts of cruelty, but also even just in the airport, almost every time in the airport, there's a stray who's running around in circles, who's lost its owner or just wandered into the airport.
Did you have a question?
Okay, it wasn't really a question, it's more like an observation because I'm really interested in what this is about tonight. I lived in Oaxaca in 2017 for about 9 months, and the part I lived in was sort of in the north of the city. And there's a whole collective of stray dogs, I'd say about probably 12, and they occupy a particular street. And they seem to be well tolerated by the locals. I don't know if anybody fed them. But they kind of were quite organised, quite self-confident. So they had a kind of a regular barking regime. It used to be about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And the barking would go off like a communication thing. I never knew what they were talking about because I don't speak dog. And then you'd see them around Easter, kind of like trotting around in a pack, and there'd be a leader. And they seemed to have like a real sense of purpose about where they were going, and never felt threatened by them. They always seemed quite friendly. Sometimes one would peel off and try and make contact. I'm not really a dog person, but they seem to be very kind of, I don't know, open to contact. But then you compare that with some of the dogs behind barred, wealthy houses that are obviously being basically there to protect property.
Yeah.
And your kind of heart races as you walk past a house, and they're kind of right at the gate, ready to kill you.
Yeah.
But the ones on the street were very friendly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They've been more exposed to humans
Yeah.
than the others. Yeah, we, for instance, on our neighborhood, we're the only people who walk our dog, the only ones. Everyone else has them behind gates, and exactly that. There are these menacing silhouettes that you just hear, some disembodied barking. You see them jumping from behind a gate, but a lot of Rottweilers and Doberman.
Yeah.
But I think in rural areas and in towns or in Oaxaca, the dogs there probably have better lives. But in Mexico City, it depends entirely on the animal's experience, I guess. And then, both abandoned, I know, for instance, in Athens too, there's a woman there who runs a shelter in the abandoned zoo in Athens. She says it's for years now. She said every day people abandon their pets in supermarket trolleys outside charity. But yeah, there are packs that they seem very self-possessed.
Sense of purpose.
As you tell, I'm not an expert, but it's just a theme that I've explored a bit.
Now that you were talking about the figure of the stray dog, I've never thought about it as an emblematic figure of Mexico, which it is. So the example that came immediately to my mind, do you remember the character Dante in this movie of Coco? Like the very picturesque concept of Mexico?
Yeah, exactly.
I think it's a very similar narrative because Dante is a stray dog.
Yeah, exactly.
And he becomes the guardian of Miguel.
Yeah.
And
Is he a cholo?
he's a cholo, I think, over the years.
Yeah.
And just running around. And secondly, do you think that the fact that most stray dogs are mixed races, don't you think that also says a lot about society in Mexico? Because as you said, you've never seen a dog of, a bulldog or a French bulldog or even a pug being abandoned by the owners. What do you think that also says something about the Mexican society, that they don't really like mixed races?
Well, there's still a snobbery, yeah. And there's still, whenever anyone says that they bought a dog from a pet shop in Mexico, I say, how can you say that how can you actually buy a dog when there's such a wonderful variety on your doorstep? Just go to a shelter and find one. Yeah, no, there is definitely.
I think now there are lots of places where you can go to adopt stray dogs. So
I'd like to
think
think
that's
most people
beginning to
go there.
change. Yeah, I think things are changing a lot.
On the thing of snobbery, because for example, a lot of people like husky dogs, like they are beautiful. But then when they see that they have a very peculiar behavior, people start disliking them. So it's also it's also ignorance, I think. But you think that a certain race of a dog is better because, oh my god, it's a race. It's a race. And then when you see the behavior traits of this race, people start saying like,
No, huskies, I think And huskies, there are husky mixes that can be quite fierce. But even now, it's very popular. Cholos become an accessory now. That's an artist.
Mm.
They're very silent dogs.
Mhm.
I'm trying to remember their bark.
But opposed to the Chihuahua,
Mhm.
which are more,
Mhm.
Yeah.
So how come there was this Cholo in Berlin? How did you find out?
I never found out.
How?
And I searched for the dog. I never saw it again. So I'm assuming it belonged to someone,
Mhm.
but it remained a mystery.
Mhm.
Another thing with Cholos is they have this. My parents have a very good friend, a very old friend in Mexico, who's always had Cholos, and she went to visit her daughter in Canada and took the Cholo, and they went to a playground, and suddenly the Cholo broke free and rushed, made a beeline across the playground and rushed to the little boy and looked up at him, and just gazed up at this little boy, and the boy reached out to hug him, and the mother began crying and said, you know, my son is autistic and he's never communicated with anyone, and now this dog, and the dog somehow sensed, and apparently they use them with autism, that somehow there's something with the Cholo that it communicates with autistic children,
Mhm.
and immediately recognized this child who crossed the playground and went, and then the boy responded to him in a way that it never responded to anyone.
Mhm.
Yeah, they're very magical dogs and have this, well, yeah, very ancient
Mhm.
aura.
Mhm.
I don't know why sometimes they win the ugliest dog contest. You know, some of them
Mhm. Mhm.
won the. In England, they're not allowed to have strays. No? What happens to? Are there strays here? No.
I think it's forbidden, like that you must register your dog. But if you, let's say, abandon the dog or you leave the dog unattended, either I don't know what's the name of the authority here. I guess it's Animal Protection Authority. They come and take the dog away from you, or they put you a fine depending on how bad it is. I remember the case of a Shar-Pei dog, and I know of the case because I love Shar-Pei dogs, that was supposed to be taken by somebody else in Scotland. So the dog was left in the station with a bag with his stuff. So supposedly somebody was expecting to come to pick the dog, but then it came out that the person who was supposed to take the dog didn't like it when the person saw it, and they just left him there. But they traced the owner because the dog was registered. So I think here it's compulsory to register your dog.
Yeah, thanks for a very interesting talk. Do you think it takes an outsider to see the strays and to really recognize them? I've not been to Mexico, but I have been to other Latin American countries, and I felt like the only one who was really, fascinated or even noticing them. That most people just saw them like pigeons.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, I mean, you have the artists fascinating on them.
Yeah.
Does it take someone from abroad to really see them?
A lot of the time. I mean, well, even Francis Alice, to my knowledge, she's the artist in Mexico who's. I think it was- But yeah, when you're in another country, things take on a symbolism, which if you're living there, they just become part of the landscape. But for instance, my father was always very aware of the dogs. But for him, I mean, for instance, it's interesting with Francis Alice, it becomes sort of allegory, and also with Malcolm Larry, allegory. But I guess for my father and my sister, it's grounded more in realism, and it's more about the dog's predicament.
There used to be dogs that sort of adopted, stray dogs that adopted a group or family, and they were always called Solovino. If you came along, Solovino. Solovino. And there were many places with mechanics and really rough people with their dog, and the dog came on its own, so it was called Solovino.
So funny.
Mhm.
I had a neighbor that used to gather and feed all the stray dogs in the neighborhood.
Where? In Mexico?
And in Mexico. And her last name was Pellegrino. Very right. So of course she was Mrs. Pellegrino.
Mm.
And she was very good to them. So
Mm.
not everybody's bad to them.
No, no.
No.
Okay. Any more questions, comments? No? Well, thank you, Chloe. It was wonderful. Great to have you. And we'll have 2 more talks by Chloe and until September, right? I believe we so yeah, we'll let you know. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Mm.